If you have a traditional IRA or a 401k, I want you to hear me very clearly. A good portion of that account is not yours. It never was. It is sitting in your name. It is growing with your investments. It shows up when you log in and check the balance. But the IRS already has a claim on every pre-tax dollar in that account, and one day it is going to collect. The only question is whether you decide when the bill comes due or whether the government decides for you. That is why I want to talk to you about a window that most retirees never even realize exists from 2025 through 2028. There is a temporary opening in the tax code that can make Roth conversions materially cheaper for people aged 65 and older. It is not some magic trick. It is not a gimmick for wealthy people. It is not one of those strategies that only matters if you spent 40 years maxing out every retirement account in sight. It matters because a traditional retirement account is not a finished story. It is deferred tax. And deferred tax has a nasty habit. It compounds in the wrong direction. A dollar you postpone paying tax on in your 40s does not stay a $1 problem. By the time you reach your 70s, that same dollar may be part of a much larger account, forced out through required minimum distributions, piled on top of Social Security, piled on top of other investment income, and taxed at a rate you would have happily avoided if only somebody had bothered to show you the map earlier. Most people never get that map. They spend decades doing what they were told to do. They work, they save, they fund the 401k, they fund the IRA, they tell themselves they are being responsible, and they are being responsible. But somewhere along the way, they absorb a dangerous assumption. They assume that because they will be retired later, their taxes will automatically be lower later. That sounds reasonable. It is also wrong for a great many people. When I look at a retiree with a large traditional IRA, I do not see a pile of money. I see a future tax event waiting for a calendar date. I see required minimum distributions waiting at age 73 or age 75. If you were born in 1960 or later, I see Social Security that may become more taxable than the retiree expects. I see Medicare premium surcharges that may show up 2 years after a big withdrawal. I see a person who thinks the danger is market volatility when the real danger may be tax timing. That is what this window is really about. It is about timing. Let me slow this down and make the foundation very clear. A Roth conversion is not a contribution. You are not taking fresh money from your checking account and placing it into a Roth. You are taking money that already exists inside a traditional IRA or 401k, money that has never been taxed, and moving that money into a Roth IRA in the year. You do that, the amount converted is added to your ordinary taxable income. You pay income tax now. In exchange, that money moves into an account where future growth can be tax-free. Future withdrawals can be tax-free, and no required minimum distributions will be forced on you during your lifetime. That is the trade pay tax. Now, at a rate you choose while you still have room, instead of paying tax later. At a rate the IRS may effectively choose for you. People hear that and immediately object. They say, "Why would I volunteer to pay taxes today?" My answer is very simple, because tax deferral is only a bargain when tomorrow is cheaper than today. If tomorrow is more expensive, the bargain was fake. And for a great many retirees, tomorrow really is more expensive. You retire, your wages disappear. For a brief stretch of years, your income is often lower than it will ever be again. You may not have started Social Security yet. Your required minimum distributions have not begun. You may have some dividends, some pension income, maybe some part-time income, but you are no longer carrying the heavy salary that used to fill your tax return. That stretch is precious. It is your runway. Then later the machine turns on again. Social Security enters the picture. Required minimum distributions enter the picture. A large IRA that looked comforting at 63 starts issuing mandatory taxable withdrawals at 73 or 75. Now, the same person who assumed retirement meant lower taxes suddenly discovers that retirement did not eliminate income. It merely changed the form of income, and the IRS taxes forms, not feelings. Now, let me show you why the years 2025 through 2028 matters so much. The 2025 tax law created a temporary additional deduction for taxpayers age 65 and older. The amount is $6,000 per eligible person. If both spouses qualify, that means $12,000 for the couple. It sits on top of the standard deduction and on top of the regular age 60. 5 additional deduction that already existed, and unless Congress extends it, it disappears after 2028. That means the code has effectively widened the low tax corridor for older Americans for a short period of time. A married couple, both over 65 in tax year 2025, can stack 3 layers: the base standard deduction, the normal additional deduction for being over 65, and this new temporary age 65 plus deduction. Put those layers together and you arrive at a very large shield against taxable income. In the example that matters here, that stack reaches $46,700. Think about what that means in plain English. It means a married couple over 65 with very modest other income can potentially move a meaningful amount of money from a traditional IRA into a Roth while absorbing little or no federal income tax on that converted amount, depending on the rest of their tax picture. That is the window, and that is why this matters, because after 2028, that extra layer disappears. The same conversion that may fit neatly inside the widened corridor in 2026 or 2027 can become more expensive in 2029 simply because the temporary deduction is gone. Same person, same account, same intent, different bill. And this is where people make a costly mistake. They assume the deduction is just a nice extra item on a return. They do not connect it to strategy. They do not understand that a deduction is not merely paperwork. In the right years, it is space, it is room, it is tax bracket capacity, it is permission to move money while the government is charging you less to do it. If you let that space go unused, you do not get to store it for later unused low. Tax years expire. Now, I want to address something else because people emotionally resist this topic. They hear Roth conversion and they think it is only relevant if they are wealthy. That is nonsense. You do not need to be rich to have a future tax problem. You simply need a decent-sized traditional IRA and enough years for that account to grow into a bigger problem later. If you have $300,000 or more sitting in a traditional IRA or 401k, you have something worth examining closely. Not because you are some rarefied millionaire, because you are exactly the kind of person who may drift into the tax trap by doing nothing. Doing nothing sounds safe. Doing nothing is often the most expensive move on the board. Let us walk through the trap carefully. Suppose you reach age 73 with a $1 million traditional IRA. The IRS does not ask whether you need the money. The IRS does not care whether markets are down. The IRS does not care whether you plan to leave the account untouched. The IRS uses a life expectancy factor at age 73. That factor is 26.5. 1 million divided by 26.5 gives you a first-year required minimum distribution of roughly $37,700. That is not a theory, that is math. And it does not stop there. Every year after that, the divisor gets smaller. The forced withdrawal often gets larger. If the account continues to earn returns, the problem can grow right along with it. A large pre-tax account can turn into a machine that manufactures taxable income for the rest of your life. Then it starts colliding with everything else. More of your Social Security may become taxable. Your modified adjusted gross income can climb high enough to trip IRMA, the Medicare surcharge. That surcharge is not some tiny inconvenience. It can add real money to your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums, and it is based on your income from 2 years earlier. That means a decision you make in 1 year can send you an unpleasant surprise much later, after you have stopped thinking about it. That is why intelligent Roth conversion work is not about charging blindly into the biggest possible number. It is about precision. It is about using the runway years before required minimum distributions begin. It is about using lower income retirement years before all the streams stack together. It is about using the temporary 2025 to 2028 deduction window before that extra room disappears. And it is about doing just enough each year to improve the lifetime outcome without accidentally creating a new problem with Social Security taxation or Medicare surcharges. This is where people need to stop thinking in slogans. The right question is not, should I do a Roth conversion? Yes or no. The right question is, how much can I convert this year at a tax cost that is plainly better than the tax cost I am likely to face later? That is the whole game. Now let me show you why the so-called gap years are so powerful. The gap years are the years after earned income falls and before required minimum distributions begin, and often before Social Security is fully in play. For many retirees, that period is somewhere between 5 and 10 years long. For some people it is shorter. For some it barely exists. But when it exists, it is one of the most valuable strategic stretches in retirement planning. Why? Because those are often the lowest taxable income years of your adult life. Not your 30s, not your 40s, not your 50s, your early retirement years. That is the moment when you still have agency. Later, agency declines. Required minimum distributions are agency. Leaving the room. A Roth conversion is agency while it still sits at the table. If you retire at 63 and RMDs begin at 73, you may have a 10-year runway. If you retire at 68 and RMDs begin at 73, your runway is much shorter, but it still matters. If you were born in 1960 or later and your RMDs begin at 75, that can change the math again and extend the runway. The principle stays the same. You are looking for years when your bracket is artificially low relative to what it is likely to become later. And now during 2025 through 2028, Congress has temporarily widened that low bracket lane for people 65 and older. I want to be very honest here. This is not a loophole in the romantic sense. People use that word. It is not some hidden trick. It is simply a temporary condition in the tax code that creates a better conversion environment for a few years. The opportunity is public, the window is real. The tragedy is that most people never line it up against their own retirement accounts and see what it means. Let me give you the strategic lens I would use. First, I would identify the current bracket I occupy in retirement, not the bracket I fear, not the bracket I imagine. The actual bracket, I would total pension income, part-time income, dividend income, interest, Social Security if it has begun, and anything else that belongs on the return. Then I would subtract the deductions that are actually available, including the temporary age 65 plus deduction while it exists. Then I would ask a brutally simple question: how much room is left in this bracket before I cross into the next one? That room is not empty. That room is where a conversion can live. If I can move $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000 into a Roth while staying in a favorable bracket and below the thresholds that create ugly side effects, I am not losing money. I am prepaying a bill at a discount. Second, I would not use retirement account money to pay the tax on the conversion if I could possibly avoid it. This point matters more than people think. If you convert $50,000 and then use part of that $50,000 to pay the tax, you have weakened the move. The goal is to get the money into the Roth, where all future growth can occur in that protected environment. If you have cash outside the IRA, or taxable brokerage money or some other liquid source, that is usually the stronger way to pay the tax bill. A Roth conversion works best when the converted dollars are allowed to stay intact inside the Roth. Third, I would pay close attention to the ugly cliffs. This is where amateurs get hurt. Social Security taxation has thresholds. Medicare IRMA has thresholds. Cross one by a little and you may trigger a disproportionately painful consequence. This is why I never tell people to convert mechanically. I tell them to model the full picture and convert deliberately. For 2026, the first IRMA threshold begins at $106,000 for individuals and $212,000 for married couples filing jointly. Using income from 2 years prior, if a person converts too much simply because they like the idea of doing more, they may create Medicare premium pain that wipes out part of the tax advantage they thought they were gaining. That does not mean you avoid conversion. It means you use a scalpel. Fourth, I would remember the phase-out rules on the age, 65, plus deduction itself. This is another place people get sloppy. The temporary deduction is not infinitely available. If you are single, it begins phasing out above $75,000 of modified adjusted gross income. If you are married filing jointly, it begins phasing out above $150,000. So the window is real, but it is not universal in exactly the same way for everybody. That still does not destroy the strategy. It simply means the strategy needs your actual numbers, not a generic video and blind optimism. Fifth, I would accept the emotional truth that the point is not to convert everything. Many retirees hear this subject and become overwhelmed because they imagine a gigantic all or nothing move. That is not how smart people handle a favorable window. They use it in slices, 1 year at a time, one bracket at a time, one threshold at a time. A modest conversion repeated across several years can materially shrink future required minimum distributions, reduce future tax drag, reduce the chance that more Social Security becomes taxable, and reduce the odds of tripping Medicare surcharges later. You do not need drama. You need repetition. Now let me give you a mental model that I think makes this plain. Imagine you own a traditional IRA that contains dry wood. The IRS has a matchbox and a date circled on the calendar. If you wait, the fire happens on their schedule. If you act early, you can move some of that wood into a fireproof vault while the transfer cost is lower. That vault is the Roth. The 2025 to 2028 deduction window makes part of the transfer cheaper. The gap years give you time. The future RMD rules give you urgency. All three together create the strategy. And this is why people who say, "I will just deal with it later," are saying something much more dangerous than they realize. Later is when the window may be gone. Later is when the account may be larger. Later is when required minimum distributions may have already started. Later is when Social Security is already in the mix. Later is when a conversion may still be useful, but far more expensive. I have no problem with paying taxes. I have a great problem with paying them stupidly. That is the point. If you are 65 or older right now, or you will be before 2028, and you have meaningful money in pre-tax retirement accounts, you should not let this period pass without at least examining the math, not guessing, examining. If you are younger than 65 but retirement is close, you still need to understand this because your runway begins before the moment you feel comfortable looking at it. People wait far too long to think about distribution strategy. They treat accumulation as serious and distribution as something they will figure out. That is backwards. The tax character of withdrawals is as important as the size of the account. $1 million handled badly is not the same as $1 million handled intelligently. Now, if I were laying out the practical steps in plain Buffett language, I would say it this way. First, know when your required minimum distributions begin. Second, count the number of years between today and that date. Third, determine the income you already have in each of those years. Fourth, calculate the real deductions available to you, including the temporary age, 60, 5+ deduction, while it lasts. Fifth, identify the amount you can convert without crossing into tax terrain that punishes the move. 6. Pay the tax from outside funds if possible. 7th, repeat the exercise each year because tax laws, brackets, market values, and your own income never stay frozen. You will notice that none of this requires a crystal ball. It requires arithmetic. That is why I like it. It is not based on hope. It is based on comparing one tax rate to another tax rate across time. Now let me address another emotional objection. Some people worry that if they convert now and tax laws change later, maybe they will regret paying tax sooner. That concern is understandable. But the current setup already contains risk if you do nothing. Doing nothing is not neutral. It is a bet. It is a bet that future tax treatment will be friendlier, that your account will not become a larger RMD machine, that more of your Social Security will not become taxable, that Medicare surcharges will not become more likely, and that Congress will not take the temporary deduction away on schedule. That is a lot of optimism bundled into inaction. I prefer fewer assumptions. If I can convert dollars now at a rate I can see, during years I can identify using deductions I know exist. I have reduced dependence on later uncertainty. That is what rational planning looks like. And there is one more reason this matters that people often ignore. A Roth does not merely help you. It can also help the people you leave behind. Traditional IRAs handed to heirs can become taxable burdens to them. A Roth IRA can be a cleaner, more flexible, and often more generous asset to pass forward. You are not only solving your own lifetime tax drag, in many cases you are improving the quality of the asset your family eventually receives that matters. So let me tell you the blunt truth. The years 2025 through 2028 are not ordinary years for older Americans with pre-tax retirement accounts. They are decision years. There is a temporary deduction in place. There is a clear tax management opportunity inside that period, and there is a closing date if you miss it because you studied the numbers and concluded the strategy does not fit your case. That is fine. If you miss it because nobody told you the window existed, that is tragic. If you miss it because you assumed Roth conversions were only for rich people, that is worse. And if you miss it because you kept waiting for a perfect moment while your runway got shorter, then you have paid the price that hesitation charges to people who confuse delay with caution. I would rather act with arithmetic than drift with hope. That has served me well in every part of investing. And it serves here too. The IRS is coming for the tax on that traditional account one way or another. That part is not negotiable. What is negotiable is the rate. What is negotiable is the timing. What is negotiable is whether you use this 4-year stretch to move money on your terms instead of their terms. And that is what I would be thinking about if I owned a traditional IRA today and I saw 2028 sitting on the horizon. I would not ask whether a Roth conversion sounds fashionable. I would ask one question: what will it cost me if I do nothing while this window is still open for most retirees? That is the right question. And once you ask the right question, the math usually starts talking very loudly.